What's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy, and welcome back to Savvy Writes Books, the channel where we talk about books and business, where today we have a little bit of business commentary on the anti-multi-level marketing side of things because there has been a new development and I'm very excited to talk about it. A couple weeks ago, you guys may remember that I did a video on this channel on Dr. Phil, who was one of the few self-help gurus that I actually used to really like, especially when I was a child and a teenager. Something about Dr. Phil just really connected with me at that time. Then later, when I was following him for a week on my second channel, Your Morning Guru, linked in the description below. When I was following him over there, I realized that I didn't like a lot of the tactics that he was using on his show, and I really didn't like some of the scandals that he'd been involved in. Again, you can take a look at that video where I covered Dr. Phil in the past if you want the full story on that, but basically, back in 2006, he got in trouble for these diet pills that he was promoting that were kind of shady and turned out to be produced by the same company that was producing Amway and Nutrilite products, which led to a lawsuit settlement that allowed Dr. Phil to pay out people not in money but in Amway products, which was extremely weird. I didn't like that Dr. Phil was connected with Amway in that way or that he'd been supportive of that. However, now it seems that Dr. Phil's show has taken a new turn, and I won't say that the show as a whole has taken a new turn, but they did air an episode that I thought could potentially be something good, because even when someone has done unethical things in the past, if they are going to use their platform to spread a positive message, I still am going to be supportive of that positive message in the future. There was an episode of Dr. Phil's show that he aired just this past week called Cult Vibes, and on that episode he ended up taking an anti-multi-level marketing type of stance on that show, though we are going to be reacting to it live today. I haven't seen the full episode yet. One reason that I'm really excited to cover this episode is that one of my best friends was actually on the show, which is how I heard about this episode happening in the first place. If you guys have been on my channel for a while, you've probably seen me do collab videos in the past with another anti-MLM creator named Monica Hayworth. She is fantastic. I love her work. She does lots of videos breaking down the reasons that MLM companies are so harmful and so exploitative to the people that work for them and the people that sell for them and everything like that. She herself was involved in multiple MLM companies in the past, had a terrible experience, and then later on eventually became a small business owner in a legitimate way herself, which I've also talked about with her on this channel. She's fantastic, and I was so happy to see her being able to go on a platform that large on, mainstream television to be able to spread the word about why these companies can be so harmful and the ways that they can have a cult type of influence. So I'm really excited to take a look at this episode of Dr. Phil today, take a look at what was being said in it, see if Dr. Phil might be moving more towards being on the right side of things or if I'm still skeptical of him. But overall, also just giving some congratulations to my friend who did some amazing work. I'll link her channel below. Please do subscribe to her if you haven't already. Anyway, with all of that in mind, let's get into today's video.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new, welcome for the first time. I'm Savvy, and of course this is Savvy Writes Books, where we talk about books and business, and today we will be talking about some business ethics stuff on the side of the self-help guru and multi-level marketing side, where we've got Dr. Phil, the self-help guru, now on a different side of the MLM debate, or so it seems. Let's take a look to dig a little deeper with that. But before we get into that, if you're new, please don't forget to subscribe, because multiple times a week I put out new videos. Go hit the little subscription button, ring the notification bell if you haven't already, give the video a like or a dislike. I won't tell you how to feel. I'd appreciate though if you did give it some engagement, because I love having people share their thoughts and opinions on my videos and having a conversation with all of you. Before we get into reacting to Dr. Phil's actual episode, first we must have a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare, which is an online learning platform featuring thousands of classes where you can develop new skills, discover new hobbies and passions, and explore your own creativity. As many of you probably know, last month was NaNoWriMo, or National Novel Writing Month, the challenge where writers attempt to write a full draft of a novel in 30 days. If you saw my vlogs on that process, you know that I participated in this challenge, and as a result, I've had a lot more videos on my channel lately about my own writing process. With that has come comments from you guys wanting to learn more about creative writing and various authors' processes, and Skillshare is a place where you can do just that. Skillshare includes lots of creative classes around writing, including creative writing courses, writing for self-discovery, and more. I've also enjoyed taking classes on Skillshare about the marketing angle of book publishing, including one taught by a friend of mine, Jenna Moreci, which I took a few years ago and absolutely loved. But I don't use Skillshare just for professional development. It also has classes for other hobbies and skills as well. For example, I love taking classes to help me with my spelling and pronunciation while I've been learning to speak Polish during the past year. And I also love adding classes to my library for art, fashion design, and other hobbies that I want to learn about just for the joy of the exploration of a new creative realm. So if you're interested in trying Skillshare, head to the link in my description below, where the first 1,000 people to use the link will get a 3-month free trial of Skillshare. Skillshare is ad-free, with new classes launching every week, and also includes subtitles for classes in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. So go ahead and click on that link in my description below and try out Skillshare for yourself. I hope you all enjoy learning something new. Now, back to the video. Now let's talk about Dr. Phil. Look at that right there on the screen. He's got these little how MLMs and cults use the same mind control techniques. And then it has one about CrossFit over here. If you guys haven't seen yet, I did a review of the book Cultish by Amanda Montell. And in that book review, we talked about how in that book, she broke down how CrossFit and similar fitness type of organizations can often use the same cult type of tactics or cult type of language manipulation to have the same kind of thing. Now, in that book, in Cultish, as well as, you know, through other people who have studied cults and how they form, there seems to be this understanding that cults in general exist along the spectrum. What is and is not a cult is not a simple binary of like, this is a cult and this is not. This thing is 100% a cult and this thing is 0% a cult. More so, there are spectrums of how dangerous a cult can be. Something like Jonestown is a extremely dangerous cult, or something like Heaven's Gate is an extremely dangerous cult where tons of people died, versus like, you know, a gym where the instructor, people get a little too over-invested emotionally in the instructor and people feel guilty when they decide to leave and do something else. Like, that's still not healthy emotionally, but it's not on the same scale as a cult where everybody's dying. But at the same time, we still should be examining those things. So I think that this is an interesting topic for this type of episode.
There are critics that claim that everywhere we turn, people and companies are using cult-like tactics to ensure you become a believer. Take a look.
Regulators say complaints against multi-level marketing companies jumped during the pandemic.
I started working in the multi-level marketing industry.
Hey, that's my girl Monica right there. There she is. What's up, Monica? Dude, she's killing it. I love it.
Thing felt very off to me, and it just seemed very, dare I say, culty. It seemed as though this was just a way for them to indoctrinate you even further.
It could also be a political group or an exercise program.
The experience that I encountered was unlike anything I had ever seen at the gym. The instructor, this gorgeous woman, never mentioned losing weight. She was just giving us all of this kind of like life inspiration. Like, I didn't want to just sign up for another class. I wanted to be her.
Next, we're going to meet Monica. She claims she was
Yes.
a love bomb the moment she joined a new financial endeavor. She says when things started to go sideways, all those people that loved her, that sisterhood, all of that, just bang, was gone.
That's a story that so many people tell after they leave MLM companies, that a lot of people join them because they really want community badly. And actually, if we're going to draw back to the book Cultish, in that book, one of the things that was talked about was the reason that communities form that can become tight-knit in the ways that eventually lead to cult behavior is stemming from this human need for a sense of community, that as the world has shifted in different ways, we don't necessarily have like a religious center of the community, or like these small villages or small towns that everyone's always lived in. The world gets more spread out over time. Sometimes people live far away from other people, but overall we all do crave having this sense of belonging. And when we are able to share a language with other people, that's where that sense of belonging really comes from. And a lot of MLM companies really prey on people's need to have someone else that understands their goals in business, or prey on people's needs to have a connection with other like-minded women in business. They say that kind of thing a lot. So the love bombing thing is definitely often a story we hear in MLMs. Absolutely. I will say really quick though, before Dr. Phil gets into the anti-MLM stuff, I appreciate, again, I'm going to say I appreciate that he's doing this episode. I really, really wish, and maybe he has, and I just haven't seen it. I haven't seen everything in existence, but I really wish Dr. Phil would start apologizing, would kind of acknowledge that he was involved with an Amway product in the past. Because in terms of MLM companies, everything I hear from people who have been in multiple of them, Amway is often the one that's considered the most cult-like, the one where you lose the most money, the one where you have like the biggest, most devastating losses. If you haven't seen it, I did this interview on my channel about a year back with a woman named Laurie who had been in 27 MLM companies, and she talked to me about her journey going through those. She was in MLM companies for 40 years, since the early 1980s. And she told me her story of all the different companies she got involved in after leaving, while she was involved in the Mormon Church, and then after she left the Mormon Church as well. I can link that video, but do check that one out if you haven't seen it already. But she talked about all those experiences, and at one point I asked her, which one was the one that was most cult-like? And it was like, without even thinking, she was like, Amway, 100%. Amway was the most cult-like. And we see that in like videos we've seen of the big Amway conventions where they try to get the big religious type things on stage. So I'm not out here to say that I think what Dr. Phil's doing with this episode is a good thing, but I wish that he would maybe apologize for having been involved with Amway in the past, because I know that it was like 16 years ago now, but I think that it almost feels like, since he was involved with that product and did pay out the settlement through like allowing people to get other Amway products and Nutrilite vitamins and things like that, since he did still partner up with them, or at least that kind of the court case settlement did. Again, you can see my whole video on that topic. It could almost lead people down the wrong path if they've been following Dr. Phil for 20 plus years, and they see those products and they don't know that those products are part of this bad thing that Dr. Phil's talking about here, because he's never made that distinction and he was supportive of those products in the past. So I just wish he would make that clear, and maybe he will in this episode, but that's just my hope for that.
Multi-level marketing is a controversial business model where people make more money by recruiting more people to sell products.
Yep.
These MLM companies, they're not just, it's not just a sales job. There is more manipulation that goes behind it. The person who is in charge of our entire team, this person was almost idolized by my team. That was another red flag. It seemed very culty.
If people quit an MLM, they're often shunned and virtually excommunicated, much like destructive cults.
After I had left the MLM company, I was almost in a sense shunned. You were seen as a number to these people. As soon as you left, that friendship, that community, that sisterhood, it no longer existed.
I'm surprised, because I know Dr. Phil has this guy who is an author who's written about cults and stuff on his channel, or on his show for this episode. I'm surprised he didn't invite Stephen Hassan, because I know he wrote a bunch of books about cults, including The Cult of Trump, which was one that I reviewed on this channel. I thought it was a super interesting book. Some of the information in it I think is a little outdated. However, I think some of the stuff he talks about with how MLMs are commercial cults and talks about them in like a cult in a commercial and business type of way is interesting. I'm wondering maybe this guy's going to say something similar.
Joining us is Monica, and she claims she unwittingly joined not one, but two business endeavors where she was promised a lot of things. One was a sisterhood, and also being a, quote, girl boss.
Hearing Dr. Phil say girl boss is funny.
He claims these companies quickly began to indoctrinate her and really took over her life. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Phil.
These companies were multi-level marketing, right?
Yes.
What was the pitch?
So for the first MLM company, it was...
I don't know if, like, on the Dr. Phil show, like, if she wasn't allowed to say the names of the companies, there might have been some kind of, like, legal thing. Because she has talked openly on her channel on YouTube before about what the companies were. I believe the first one was Mary Kay and the second was Beachbody. But I don't know if maybe on Dr. Phil you're, like, not allowed to say the company names or something. I don't know.
Student loan debt, like many people do. And when she was done with her presentation, she started to pitch the opportunity to me. That's their favorite word to use. And she just basically put a really nice pink bow on it and just tried to make it seem like something else. Oh,
dude, she said the pink bow. Dude, girl, I know what you're doing. I bet she probably wasn't allowed to say that it was Mary Kay. I think there was probably, because Mary Kay has they're all about being pink, the pink bow, the pink Cadillac. I don't know for sure if that was meant to be like a wink, this is Mary Kay type of thing with the pink bow. I don't know. I'm just wondering if maybe she wasn't allowed to say it.
It wasn't, because I did end up joining. And I did end up getting one of the larger starter packs, which was a little over $1,000. And as I said, I had student loan debt at the time, so I was not in the financial position to be able to do that. But she had me sign up for a company credit card that the MLM company had actually offered. So I went ahead and I signed up and quickly found out that it was not what I thought it was.
Yeah, especially with the company credit card thing, like, that's a story you hear with MLMs a lot too, is like people, when people can't afford the starter kit to sign up, people say like, oh, this is investing in yourself. You need to invest in yourself. And they like make it into this manipulation thing. It's like she's talking about here, she had student loan debt and she wanted to pay that off. But you know, when you're in a position where you don't have the money to pay it off, and then if someone's telling you in order to make money, you've got to spend money first. Well, I don't have the money to spend in the first place. And then they get you with this company credit card thing. That's just even more predatory, because what do credit cards have? They have high interest rates. Ugh, I hate this.
I went to one of the conventions for this particular company. While I was there, I was really motivated and they were just hyping you up and everything. But once I got home and I was removed from all of that, I noticed that it's just a bunch of fluff is what I like to say all the time, is because there was no mention of how to market the product, how to talk. There was very little mention of that, but it was all about being a girl boss. And yeah, that was my experience with the first one.
So that's I've done a lot of reactions on this channel to speeches and keynote speeches at MLM conferences, like Rachel Hollis at the Beachbody conference, and Lindsay Teague Moreno at the Young Living conference, Grant Cardone at the World Financial Group conference, all of those type of things. And that is a recurring thing that I've pointed out, is that in those presentations, they don't really give you legitimate sales advice. They're not giving you like legitimate training. They're pumping you up with these repeated platitudes to get you excited, to get you emotionally invested. They're often being very charismatic on stage, telling you jokes, making you feel like you can relate to them, and it gets you more emotionally invested. And then when you get home and try to put it into practice, you're like, what do I do? But the environment's more about indoctrination. At least that's always the impression I've gotten.
Where does it cross the line to being exploitative, manipulative versus just good business?
And they start saying that their business plan is perfect. Again, a bait and switch con. And when they're talking to you more about recruitment than they are about what you are going to get, then a kind of light goes on and you say, well, wait a minute, I thought this was about a product. I thought we had a product line that was something desirable that people would buy and we'd make money by selling a product. No, it's about recruiting more people into the MLM. And the MLM participants are buying the product, and that's who's buying their product. And it's all about just building the multi-levels.
Yeah, this guy's absolutely right. That's one of the key things that is wrong with MLM companies, is that the salespeople become the customers, and that's what's so exploitative about it. That's one thing we've talked about so many times on this channel and on a lot of channels that break down these business models. If you're the one that's having to keep buying inventory from someone above you to sell it to other people, there's something wrong with that, especially because you could end up losing more money than you make. If you're losing more money than you make, and it's not in a business that you have created, that you actually own the company, that you could sell the company to someone else if you want because you have the legal ownership of that company, if it's not that, you need to take a long, hard look at what you're doing and really look into if this is making you money or if someone else is trying to kind of pull one over on you. I think that's extremely a big red flag.
And the love bombing that happens in the beginning, that is the seemingly unconditional love that people are being showered with when they come in. It's not unconditional. It's highly manipulative and conditional. And what they're really doing is saying, yeah, we love you if you will become a distributor and become involved. But as soon as you hesitate, and this is where it becomes cult-like, they're like ready to excommunicate you and shun you.
How many people here have been approached by a multi-level pitch by somebody?
Oh, God. Yeah. Me too. So many of us.
That's like 75% of the audience. You got to come in. Let's get you a microphone.
My question is, what would you say the target demographic is of these MLMs, and what can we do to help these people avoid falling into these traps?
I think that's a great question. I would say what I think is the target demographic a lot of times is, it depends on the company. If it's a product-based one, it's usually going to be women and usually mothers. Usually mothers on the younger side, like in their 20s, maybe early 30s. Moms who are struggling either with going back to work after having their first kid because daycare costs are so high, or moms in religious communities where they are pressured socially to stay home and yet their family can't survive on one income. Those are often the people I see targeted the most by like product-based ones where the products are targeted at women. I see a lot of men being targeted, specifically like young men who want to be entrepreneurs tend to get targeted with like crypto MLMs, real estate MLMs, insurance type MLMs, ones that have less of a like physical product you can hold. But that's been what I've noticed. Let's see.
Well, you've got a pulse.
Seriously,
if you've got a pulse,
that is true.
How would you answer that?
I would say there's a lot of women involved, and I would say the demographic for a lot of these groups is 18 to 26. But then I would say they micro-target certain demographics for certain companies. Like I participated in a documentary about a leggings MLM called LuLaRoe. You may have heard about that group.
That's interesting how he pronounced LuLaRoe, but okay. Was it the Lula Rich documentary? I don't remember this dude being in it. Maybe he was. Is there another documentary on, or was it the Vice one? I don't know, I saw the Vice one so long ago. I don't know, but I did a pretty thorough review of Lula Rich on this channel, and I watched it all the way through twice. I don't remember him being in it. Maybe it was the Vice one from a few years back.
And I think their target group was women, married women, single mothers who are at home and want a home-operated business. Any demographic could be targeted, but I would say that during the pandemic, when people were alone and working from home, that made people incredibly vulnerable.
Yes, the pandemic was a huge thing people were exploiting for MLM companies, especially because a lot of people couldn't go to work in person because it wasn't safe in a lot of cases. So that was a huge thing when people had to quarantine, and they were like, here's a way to work from home. And then also a lot of people were getting laid off from their jobs as companies were struggling. Oh man, especially right at the beginning, like those first couple months after COVID first was discovered in the US, those first couple months, the MLMs were hitting it hard and they were trying to exploit people. And the worst was like the pseudoscience ones. There were a lot of ones like out there that were like, these essential oils will boost your immune system and protect you against COVID, which was just lies. It was so dangerous.
And you had a lot of people getting sucked in. And if you're searching online, the algorithm of the search engine will keep serving up more information about what you're inquiring about. And many of these groups are very savvy, and they use search engine optimization.
No, I'm savvy. They're manipulative.
So that the algorithm will pull their group to your attention, and then you go down the rabbit hole.
And by the way, there was a study done by truthandadvertising.org. They looked at the financial disclosures of 32 of the bigger MLMs, and 80% of the people that got involved made less than $1,200 in a year before expenses. And
before expenses, that's what's key. They probably actually lost money. There's also the famous John M. Taylor study from the FTC website that shows like 99.6% of people losing money in MLMs. And I know that study gets kind of overused a lot, but I mean, the math in it does check out. There's a lot of research and citations of that in the book Ponzi-nomics, which I highly recommend as well. The truth in the fact that people were making that much in revenue and then also were having to pay membership fees, also had to pay starter kit fees. Oh my goodness.
They didn't mention that, did they?
No.
They forgot to say anything about that?
They forgot to tell, yep.
I want to be very clear. I'm not saying, and I don't think Rick is either, that MLM organizations are cults. If you're going to a gym, it's not a cult. Why? Because you can leave. I mean, they're not asking you to sell your house and come stay with them.
I think what a cult is really depends on context, like what anything is, right? And that's why I like to bring up the idea of a cult existing along a spectrum, because yeah, they're not cults on the same level that Heaven's Gate is a cult. They're not that type of cult. They're not a cult where they're trapping you in a house, or like in Jonestown when people did actually realize it was a cult and wanted to leave. And like Jim Jones and some of his upper level people would like physically stop people from leaving, or they would like murder people who tried to get on a plane and leave and stuff. There's a whole documentation of that in the book Cultish as well. Because a lot of people don't actually know that about Jonestown, which is that there were a lot of people who wanted to leave, who didn't want to drink the Flavor Aid with the cyanide. Like there were a lot of people who actually wanted to leave, and he killed them. So there, you couldn't even escape. So cults like that are like on a different level, absolutely. But I do think that just to say like you can leave, I don't think it's necessarily as easy as just saying just leave, because at that point you're so financially invested that it seems like it might be financially impossible for you to leave, because especially if you have a company credit card, like Monica was pointing out earlier, and then you're tied into debt with interest on that company's credit card that you've put things on, they find ways to get you locked in with them. So like, yes, you can physically leave, but leaving is often not as easy as it sounds in a lot of these cases. But you still should leave, I completely agree. But I do think that's not necessarily evidence of it not being a cult. But I think we can definitely say it's not a cult in the same way that like a murder cult is a cult.
But the tactics, the techniques, the methodology they use are on a continuum of manipulation.
Completely agree. But Dr. Phil, you need to address the Amway thing, bud.
What we see as cult-like is, for example, a group that puts a lot of pressure on someone. And there's a kind of peer pressure to conform, to submit. And there might be a leader who is not the classical cult leader, but who is using his or her charisma to influence people and setting themselves up as a kind of prototype. What you want to ask that leader is, are you open to criticism? Can you be wrong? And if that leader makes outrageous claims, and on the basis of those claims wants to make demands on you, you have to do due diligence.
I agree with this point as well, that a huge red flag in cults is when criticizing the leader isn't allowed, or it's considered wrong to look at sources of material that go against what the leader says or the approved sources of material, the whole information control thing. If the leader acts like they're above criticism, huge red flag always.
But I think what we're seeing in cult-like persuasion techniques that are being used more apparently everywhere around us is that these techniques work. It could happen to anyone. It can happen to the most prominent families. It can happen to very educated people.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people go through the world like, oh, I would never fall for a cult. That's what you got to remember is like, you know, even like I'm someone who's really into examining these things. I consider myself to be a very skeptical person, but I did a video on my channel a couple years ago where I talked about how I went to an MLM job interview, like a Smart Circle type of thing, by accident. I didn't know that's what it was. I didn't notice those glaring red flags in the job posting, and even during the interview, it took me until I read the Glassdoor reviews after the interview for it to actually sink in, because there were a lot of red flags that I completely missed just because of the charisma of the people talking to you, because of the way people are presenting the information. People are very careful with their language, and they're very manipulative. So yes, we are all vulnerable to this type of influence, no matter how educated or how logical we tend to be. So it's just something we always need to be on the lookout for.
And so what we need to do is just kind of realize that this is around us and do our best to recognize the warning signs.
I think old sayings get to be old sayings because they're profound. The things stay around generation after generation after generation because they just ring true. And an old saying that if something's too good to be true, it's probably because it's just not true.
Yeah, kind of like the diet pills you sold, Dr. Phil.
We really have to ask questions. And I worry about it in this divisive political environment we're in today with identity politics, where people are afraid to even ask questions for fear that they'll be shunned.
That's a little bit of I mean, I guess that's true to an extent, but it feels a little bit off topic to bring up. Not fully, like, that's a weird point to drop in there and not expand on. I don't know if he's going to expand on it, but I think that there's some truth to that, in that when you live in a very politically divisive era, there's a little bit of the element of information control, right? Where it's like the idea of platforming and deplatforming people is very popular right now, so it gets to this whole idea of like, oh, you shouldn't even listen to anyone who's willing to listen to this person. And I get why people are careful in those ways, and I get why people are afraid of exposing bad ideas to the sunlight, I guess. I don't know how to say that better. Like, look at all the people who keep like having Kanye and stuff on their shows. Like, that's an extremely stupid move to keep doing, and yeah, someone needs to just rein him in. So that's an example of like, I get why people might not want to be giving platforms to people, because there are a lot of dangerous ideas out there. You know, things like Alex Jones having a show and the kind of stuff that he says. But at the same time, when you have to realize how to balance that, because then there's going to become a point where it's like, okay, does that mean that if there's someone with dangerous ideas, does that mean we should never listen to anyone who's been on their show, that we should never listen to anyone who's listened to their show? How far do we take that? Because if we take that too far, you can very easily isolate yourself in an echo chamber. And even if you think you're surrounding yourself with the best possible ideas, it is possible for cults to form. Because even if you look at, like, again, this is why I highly recommend the book Cultish. If you look at throughout history, some of the worst cults even to have form with people who have these really good ideas, almost like borderline utopian ideas about people getting along and living in harmony, and like they have really good, they're like involved in like local political activism in seemingly very progressive and positive ways, and they use that as a manipulation tactic. So I get what he's kind of saying here, that like if we cut ourselves off from alternate viewpoints, it can create an echo chamber that can easily foster someone who could be a cult leader sliding on in and being able to manipulate us easier, because we kind of, when you feel like you can trust everyone around you too easily, you tend to turn off your critical thinking a little more. So I think there is some truth to that. I just think that saying identity politics and then not elaborating on that, you could draw some weird conclusions from that, so I'm not quite sure what he's getting at there.
It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, if you ask questions that make you unpopular, that's a problem.
I'm really troubled, as a person who's watched destructive cults for many years, seeing that the word is becoming somewhat politicized. That one political party calls another party a cult.
I call every political party a cult. And I know when I've said that in the past, people are like, oh, are you one of those cringe centrists? No, I think centrists are also a cult. I'd guess if you're going to ask about my actual political views, I'm probably a leftist, just in terms of like the actual policies I support. But like, I think that like organized political parties and the ways that they funnel information and try to shame people who seek information outside of them, I think are often very cult-like. And especially because I think a lot of people involved in running them tend to be very corrupt. I just really don't trust politicians in general.
This is becoming, you know, a way of denigrating and putting people down. And I think what we should recognize is that cults are not democratic. They don't elect people. They have a leader. The leader is absolute and totalitarian, and whatever the leader says is right, and whatever the leader says is wrong, is wrong. And that's not really consistent with the political party system that we have. So I think we ought to chill on using the word cult in political discussion.
I'm not really sure what he means by that. I feel like we're at the very end of the episode, and that's kind of like a really huge topic to suddenly introduce. Like, we need to stop using cult in political way. What does that mean? Like, I need some examples of how that's happened, because I'm over here, I'm just randomly calling every political party a cult because I'm an edgelord. But like, if he's giving this as like actual advice, now I'm trying to wonder, like, what does he mean by that? what does he mean that cults have become politicized? Because there are political cults that exist. And does he mean like when people say that Trump is a cult leader? Is this why they didn't have Stephen Hassan on, because he does believe Trump is a cult leader? I don't know. I think a lot of politicians are cult leaders. Trump is probably the one who's the most upfront about it, but I think a lot of them are.
There'd be a political cult, yes, but typically this is being used, I think, to denigrate political parties. And I think it's coarsening the exchange and discussion in our country.
I think that depends how you use it. Like, if I can examine Donald Trump's influence as a cult leader, which I think is a fair thing to do considering the fact that he has led multiple MLM companies. I'll link my video about this up in the cards. I did a whole video examining this. But he has led and supported MLM companies, and he does use, like, known cult tactics. Like, I think that there are some politicians that you can absolutely say are cult leaders, but I don't think that means that, like, everybody who's ever fallen prey to their cult influence, I don't think you should go up to them and just say, you're in a cult. I think it's more about understanding the ways that people in cults have been, not brainwashed, because that's not really how it works, but like the ways that they've been influenced or manipulated to believe certain things, and like trying to understand where it comes from. If your goal is to help break down cult influence, that's where you kind of have to come at it from. That's been my experience, but again, I'm no expert. I'm just an idiot on the internet.
And I wish people would stop.
If you can leave and get your stuff and go home, if you can leave the exercise gym, if you can quit the company, if you can, I'm not saying it's easy, but that's a lot different. And the damage from these things can be really far reaching. So be careful. Be careful. Thank you, guys.
I absolutely agree. And so let's do some takeaways from this episode. I will say I'm very glad to see Dr. Phil taking this anti-MLM approach, and I really do hope that he means this genuinely and actually does care about these companies not manipulating or taking advantage of people anymore, and that he isn't just doing this because breaking down MLM companies seems to be on the more popular side of things right now, and he thought this would get views. I'm really hoping that's not what he did, because then again, if you think about like a lot of the audience of daytime TV, it tends to be, a lot of people who have kids, people who are at home with cable and things like that. So a lot of people who could get roped into MLMs might also be in Dr. Phil's target audience demographic wise. That absolutely could be true. So maybe this episode was even somewhat risky for him to make, and he could be opening himself up to criticism. I will give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that could be true. It's kind of like when I reviewed, you guys remember when I reviewed Rachel Hollis's book, Didn't See That Coming, a couple years ago, and in that book, she has this whole section where she talks about how you shouldn't pay for the starter kit, and you shouldn't join a company that makes you pay up front to join, and she was basically like taking the anti-MLM approach, which I thought was good, but then I was like, well, girl, you were the one on stage at the Beachbody conference, you were the one accepting 6 figures of speaking fees to go on stage and promote these companies, and you're not acknowledging that you were one of the people encouraging people to be in these things in the first place. And that's kind of how I feel about what Dr. Phil's doing right now. Like, on the one hand, I'm really glad, I'm like extremely grateful that he is using his giant platform to this size to spread that message. At the same time, I think he really does need to apologize and admit that he was wrong publicly about the Amway stuff from the past, because otherwise it really does look like he is almost saying that company is okay. At least that's kind of the vibe that I get. But overall, I will say, I think this episode is a net positive. It is something that is moving in the right direction of getting the word out there further and further that these companies are dangerous, because there really are still a lot of people who don't know. And at the end of the day, I really am glad that he's spreading the word about this. I'm also super happy for my friend Monica that she got to go on the show and share her story and share her experience about that, because I think that the more people who can get their word out about their bad experiences in these companies and to a wider audience, the more people will be informed and can be on the lookout and not make the same mistake. And I think that that's going to be good for the world as a whole. And guys, please don't forget, do check out Monica's channel linked below. Please subscribe to her. She's one of the sweetest people on the internet. And honestly, she was like, when I started making anti-MLM videos on my channel, she was like literally the first person to welcome me into this community online and to want to do a collab with me. Like, she's just so friendly and sweet, and she's amazing. So definitely give her some love, because she deserves it. Y'all, I really appreciate you being here with me for this video today. I will see you guys again later this week, but in the meantime, please don't forget to support legitimate small businesses and not MLM companies. But otherwise, have a fantastic start to your day. Bye!
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should pick up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.